Welcome to American Building. I'm your host, Atif Kader. Join me as we explore the skylines and strip malls, the crosswalks and rail crossings, the balconies, the buildings, and the boroughs shaping the next generation of real estate. Let's build common ground. Today, our guests are builders Jesse Russell and Ryan Andrews, who are the CEO and the CFO of Hiatus Homes. Jesse began his career in television production before pivoting to home building in 2014, focusing on high-quality, small-footprint homes in the Pacific Northwest. Ryan started at PIMCO, was an early employee at PropTech startup CrowdStreet, and later specialized in capital markets and development finance. Hiatus Homes is based in Bend, Oregon, and designs and builds small-scale homes. That's everything from ADUs to cottage communities. And since 2020, they've raised $8 million and deployed capital across 4 projects focused on creating durable, energy-efficient, and community-oriented housing. Today, we're going to discuss Hiatus Ninth, which is a for-sale project of twin homes, one-bed cottages, and ADUs located in Bend. So thank you for being here with us, Jesse and Ryan.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start off in a place that's not a small-scale development. We're going to talk about television production. So Jesse, you started in television production. How did storytelling and the production process shape your approach to design and placemaking later on?
Yeah, sure. So I was a journalism major and thought I was going to become a documentary filmmaker and was living in New York. And my first job was a reality TV show. It seemed like it was like documentary. You know, there was storytelling elements. You interviewed people. There was B-roll. And that's just where my career went. I just became a reality TV producer. Got pretty fed up with the content that I was making. I was living in LA at the end of that. And I just wanted to get back to home, to Bend, Oregon. And we were having a real housing crisis. I was pitching some shows to a network that had a show called Tiny House Nation. And that was the first time I'd seen tiny houses. And I went back to my office and looked up tiny houses on wheels and just got really enamored with it and was like, I think this will work in Bend. So sold all my stuff and moved back to Bend and built the first tiny house on wheels in a friend's backyard. And that house was called Hiatus, and that's what we would go on to call the company.
And so hiatus means a break from something. So was this a break from New York, a break from real life, or a break from what housing production had been before? Perhaps all of these?
Yeah, maybe a little bit of all of those. At the time, for me, it was a hiatus from my life and my career that I had created and that chapter of life. Before I came back to Bend, I went to Europe for a few months just to kind of I was doing a lot of self-help book reading and journaling and what am I going to do with my life? And for whatever reason, the tiny house thing was the thing that came up. And when I did the first house and then went on to do the first development, a lot of the skills that I had learned as a producer in television applied to home building. There was working with a budget, there was a timeline, there was crews. And so I think that's why I was able to kind of muddle through the beginnings of this.
Okay. And Ryan, you've worked across institutional investing, prop tech, debt funds. So what did those experiences teach you about raising capital for this type of housing construction?
Yeah, we really took a different approach to raising capital that I pulled from my background. So in 2012, the Jobs Act was passed, and that changed the way private capital had been raised since the 30s. So, 80 years, capital had to be raised for private projects, especially private equity real estate projects. You think of smoke-filled rooms in the back of the bar or something with people that are in the know and people that you knew. Well, a lot of that was because the SEC rules were you could only market to people that you already had an existing relationship with. They had to be accredited investors. You could not publicly talk about your investment. And these laws were originally put in place in the 30s after the Great Depression in order to protect the little guy, protect the investor. As 80 years and a couple generations go by, what these laws ended up doing was locking out a whole bunch of smaller investors that were classified as like unsophisticated. And so the Jobs Act changed the rules and allowed private equity type offerings to go out to everybody publicly. And then there's a couple different classifications. Some of them you can still only bring in accredited investors. Some of them you can bring in just anybody. And there's some different rules that are still in place to protect investors, but that totally changed the game. I got exposed to that early on as an early employee at CrowdStreet. So I'd moved to Bend. I was working in institutional finance at the time for PIMCO, but I'd always wanted to get into real estate development. So I was doing like investor marketing and investor management with bonds, which is, so esoteric. Like, what is a bond? It's like paper or a Bloomberg journal.
An obligation to pay.
Yeah, exactly. It's not tangible the way real estate is. And I just, that tangibility connected to me. So I'd worked for a startup, raised venture capital. That was like a tech company. And around the same time, CrowdStreet was getting formed here in Bend. It was still in its infancy and ended up opening its office in Portland. And they've now moved a couple times since then. But I knew the owner and so came on to do their early investor relations and investor management on that portal. And so that was when the whole Jobs Act stuff and, Reg D 506C offerings were just getting created. And you could raise money on the internet from people you didn't know for the first time in, ever, because the internet didn't exist 80 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so that gave me exposure to a total, new type of capital raising that then a few years later, when we formed the Hiatus Capital Fund, instead of following the traditional path of like, well, we want to do a real estate development, let's go find institutional private equity to back us. We said, hey, good real estate projects, especially, small scale real estate projects, should be funded by the community. And if these projects really want to get done in the community should fund them. And so we put a fund together in 2020 on the heels of a couple of successful smaller syndicated projects, and raised capital from local investors, raised about $8 million from 60 local investors to say, let's go do 4 projects. And so it was really successful in the sense that like the community responded super well to the offering. Our investors, we meet them on site. I don't know, all the time. They want to drive by our stuff. They want to come to open houses. They want to see what they're building. They trust us. We also live in this post Bernie Madoff world, but they can actually go drive by lots in their local community, like Hiatus Ninth, and see that it's there and go to an open house and know that like, as investment managers, we didn't grab the money and go. So that's been kind of my thread from institutional finance to more grassroots local investor raising. And it was that early exposure through CrowdStreet that totally opened my eyes to this new style of capital raising.
Okay, so we talked about raising capital on the small scale, which is coming from a lot of people, smaller check sizes, and people driving by and hanging out on your construction site, which may not be happening if you're getting capital from PIMCO for your projects. Okay, got it. So these are a lot of differences. We have not directly talked about what small scale development is. So tiny homes, etc. Tell us the words that are being used so we understand the language. And then I want to hear from you why you think that's a solution to the housing crisis that we have in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, small scale development that, we specifically build houses that are between 500 and, 1,200 square feet. And it's an infill development, and most small scale stuff is infill. So within the city limits, we take lots that, or older houses that are on large lots, and we put a lot more houses on those lots. And that was something that wasn't actually legal when I came back to Bend and I tried to put 4 small tiny houses on a 5,000 square foot lot.
And when you say legal, is that through the zoning code, the building code, or both?
Both, yeah. Mostly the land use code. So a residential standard zone, which is a zone, most of the lots in Bend are residential standard. The density was the first problem, is that you could only have basically one house on a 5,000 square foot lot. Now there's been a lot of legislation from the state, from Oregon State, and then adopted by the cities and adopted by the city of Bend, that now allows us. We have a whole building code called 3.8 building alternatives. And now there's a bunch of different building types that you can do on residential standard lots, including micro apartments, courtyard, shared court, small unit development,
dwelling, yeah,
which was what we used on Ninth, where we could actually make the lots a lot smaller than what was previously allowed. So that's the part of small scale development that we do. But there's adaptive reuse. That's when people go in and they find an old building and they make offices out of it and some commercial. And most small scale developers, that I've dealt with, they usually are from that community. They care about seeing something and making their community better through the building types that are there. So we do kind of one part of that, but there's a whole array of it. But I would say the things that make a small scale developer are, you care about what the end product does, probably more than profit. The first thing is, what is this thing we're going to put into the world? We know that it has to be profitable. But we are not just going and leveling 30 acres and putting in townhomes.
Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. That's about a response to a need. It's about a way of rethinking the legal underpinnings of how things are built, zoning code, building code. And it's about serving what people need / can actually pay for. Does that sound like a accurate kind of summary?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, another way to look at it is to kind of juxtapose infill development as compared to greenfield development.
Okay.
Greenfield development is what takes place. That's like giant subdivisions outside of town, or giant office parks, or big box retail on the edges of town, because you need massive 10, 20, 50 acre parcels that get bulldozed, flattened, and then roads, utilities are brought in, and then a master plan goes on top of it. That's called generally greenfield development, as opposed to infill development. And small scale developments are often like a type of infill development, where you're working within a city, within density, with existing utilities, maybe an existing structure that gets demolished or adapted and reused or renovated, and additional density used. And it often has to do with the scale of the project. And so where greenfield development might be, large phases of 50 homes each, or, multiple big box retail stores and everything, small scale development is a different scale, in the sense of like, it's a small project. It might be on a half acre, might be on 2 or 3 acres, but it's definitely infill. And it tends to, in Jesse's point of like somebody caring about the neighborhood or having a connection to like this thing existing in the world, it tends to be in the scale of the neighborhood. And so rather than trying to build, kind of like a monstrosity that sticks, that, a 7-story building amidst a bunch of 100-year-old cottage homes, we're in a mill town. So we have like old mill homes from, 80 years ago. Instead of building a giant 7-story building in the middle of that, maybe you build 2 or 3 stories, and it has some, wood siding and some elements that kind of tie it into the neighborhood, so it doesn't look so different. And so those are some of the, kind of objective and subjective elements of small scale development.
Okay. So let's talk about a example of small scale development. So that's Hiatus North. So give me an overview in terms of the program related to that project, the timeline, and where you are in that whole process?
Yeah, that's Hiatus Ninth. So that was a half-acre residential lot. It had one house on it when we got the property. Because of some of that zoning and building code changes that I spoke of earlier, we were able to subdivide the residential lot into 9 lots. So there's 9 lots on the in the subdivision, and then what we built on there is also a building type that's been accepted by the city, and now we can build, which is a main house with a ADU. In this building type, it's actually attached. So if you were to look at the building, it's got a butterfly roof, and you have on the first floor you have a garage, a kitchen, living room, and then you go upstairs and there's 1 bedroom. That's 1 unit, and then attached over the garage, accessed by the outside of the building, is an additional unit, which is a lofted ADU. So we call it a twin home. That's just what we call it. But by code, it's actually an attached ADU.
Okay. And talk to me about who you would, or who actually is the customer segment for the main building as well as the ADU.
Yeah, I think so our target customer there is a small household. So small households, which is 1 to 2 person households, is the both the largest and the fastest growing segment of households nationally, and certainly in Bend, Oregon. It's also the least served type of household, certainly here and generally nationally. And so much of what gets built is like that greenfield subdivision style development, which tend to be larger homes on larger lots, and are often just more expensive because it's more land, longer commute, larger home, as opposed to a small household. So what we've seen, especially with the millennial generation and even going into Gen Z as they've kind of grown up as well and are moving out, is the people have 2 options. Their preference would be, if they're a 1 person household or a 1 or 2 person household, to have their own place. But maybe they're forced by the housing stock to go buy something more expensive in the suburbs that's 3 or 4 bedrooms, but then put adult unrelated roommates in it in order to help subsidize the mortgage. And so if we can create a home that is designed for them, that's the right size for them, that we try to call, or like to call, attainable by design, it's a small home for a small household. So these are not for families. There's lots of housing stock for families and people with children and 2 dogs and everything like that. This is a 1 to 2 person household, and the ADU in the main home, it's the same target market. The units are almost the same size. One is a little bit larger and has the garage. One is a little bit smaller, but a really good layout. And so this is, your young professional, millennial or Gen Z, young professional. This is your downsizing boomer. This is your multi-generational household. We've had several people, potential buyers, walk through Ninth that it's like an aging baby boomer parent, an adult child that's single, and, parent might need, is still totally living independently, might need some help a few years from now, wants to age in place. They each want their own space. Adult child wants to be able to go out on a date and come home and not have mom there. And so they've got separate entrances, separate walls, but they're close. Also, because millennials and Gen Zers really struggle to have the down payment to be able to buy a place, the multi-generational household can work really well, because you might have a boomer that liquidated out of a larger property with a lot of equity and can come in on the down payment, and then they work out an arrangement to live together. And so, it's a really flexible space, separate enough where you can have 2 totally unrelated parties and it feels like 2 separate homes, or you can have kind of related parties. So we think, our buyers here could certainly be investors that are buying these and renting them out to 2 different parties, multi-generational people, small households, that love that what's starting to become known as a lock and leave lifestyle. So this might be like part-time van lifers that work remotely. So think of a couple that has their Sprinter van, and they want to be on the road 6 months a year, but they also want to have a base camp to crash at. Well, this is great. It's very lock and leave, and it can generate income off the other unit while they're maybe away and just kind of leaving their unit. Somebody's on the property watching over it. So it's a really kind of new style of housing that caters to a new lifestyle that's emerged with these small households.
Okay. So I find it really fascinating because you're talking about family units or households that are far different than the traditional for past generations. So I want to dive into the nuts and bolts of the acquisition. So how did you source the site, and what made it attractive to you guys despite being small and potentially not allowable originally, the type of construction you were thinking of doing?
Yeah. Well, it came through a relationship. The two guys that are they're kind of like mini developers. They work together, and they might flip, find a house and flip it and do that sort of thing. They had purchased the lot and the land, and came to us, and they saw what we were doing with cottages and this kind of denser infill and these smaller homes. And just asked us if we thought it could be a Hiatus project. And so they became partners on the project, and I'll let Ryan kind of describe how it worked financially, but it worked, really well because we were able to do the entitlements without having to go and raise the money for the land. So that was really useful because these new housing types, and anytime a city adopts new code, there's some clunkiness to it, and it takes a while for the city staff to kind of figure it out if you're doing it for the first time. So that entitlement phase can sometimes be longer than we want it to be.
Okay. And what were the key points when you were pitching this to the local zoning board for a variance? Like, I mean, I would assume, because of being a city planning commissioner myself, the automatic answer is often, wait, what? And then you have to go through the whole entire story.
Well, we've been really fortunate in to be to build to code and not have to ask for variances for any of this, because the state has handed down some legislation that the city of Bend has been really, really proactive on adopting, and like letting us as developers use that code. So yeah, we didn't have to actually do any variances. We used the small unit development code that was in the code books to do this project.
Very good. Then in terms of the building process, so you guys do the design, because this is a relatively unique, interesting style of construction, and then you partner with a builder to actually get it executed. So talk to me about that process of the design and construction.
Yeah, sure. So, we were originally a general contractor, and we built our own homes. We did that for tiny house. We did tiny houses. We did tiny taverns. We, did food trucks for a while. And then we did the first development. We were the general contractors on that. I was really the general contractor, the bookkeeper, the everything, and, almost lost my mind completely doing those 22 cottages at first. And then, then we expanded, and now, we have a design director who's an architect. We have a marketing and salesperson that sells our homes, and then Ryan and I. So that process looks like us designing it. Sean is our design director, who's an architect. We designed the building. We get the land. Ryan and I work to get the land use through the city. We create the lots. We work with a large horizontal contractor that comes in and does the roads and does all the utilities. And then we've now partnered with a general contractor that's a Northwest, a really large Northwest general contractor that has great processes, gives us a guaranteed price, builds on time. And that was a long process to find a really good partner in that. We've had a lot of bad partners as general contractors that don't build on time and don't build for the cost we originally had, and that can really screw a project up. So That process with Simplicity is the name of the company, is a great one, and they build everything that we do now. So yeah, we'll get the permits. We do all the permits and get the lots ready, and then work with them on the first home. We have a bunch of construction touch points, where when the foundation's done, we go down. We have a ton of touch points where really every week we're down there figuring the first house out. But once the first house is figured out, all the rest of the houses are the same home. So now that we've gotten through the model home, we're basically every lot in the 9 lots. You could look at it; it'd be a good way to see how a house gets built, because the first one is just a foundation. Then you've got the subfloor, and then there's the framing, and then this one has drywall, and then this one's finished. So you can just see across the development how a house gets built. Well, once we get that thing locked in, there's a lot less management that we have to do. And then once the home is finished and we have CO, we're the sales. We do the sales.
I see. Okay, so you guys are doing the sales in-house. You have a licensed broker, I presume?
That's right, yeah.
Got it. Okay, so what's your approach to the pricing of the units and the sales process overall? Because I'm guessing narrative is a big part of small-scale development, and I'm thinking is also a part of selling small-scale development.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think number one is getting people in the space. When people look at square footages on paper, so our main unit here is like 675 square feet. When you look at that number, that feels incredibly small. And so it's getting people physically in the space, because as soon as you step into the space, you're like, oh, this is totally livable. It's big. There's high ceilings. There's tons of natural light. Everything. There's lots of storage, lots of built-in storage, because that's so important when you have a small space. Everything's been thoughtfully laid out. And so that's a big key, is just get people in the home. Then once they're in the home, kind of like talking to them, or they get it. Most people that are attracted to it get it and get the lifestyle of like, okay, I don't have a giant piece of property, a giant yard, a lot of maintenance, so I can bring things into my life that are that bring value to me in other ways. I can, spend my weekends mountain biking instead of taking care of a yard. It's easy to lock and leave and be gone for a month if I travel or take my Sprinter van or whatever it is. And so it's getting people in the space and then talking to them about the amenities that make that home a really good fit for a more minimalist lifestyle of somebody that is like, I want to bring things into my life externally to bring it value. I don't want to just be doing maintenance on my large home. And so helping people understand that's a big part of the narrative. The other part of the narrative, that's kind of like the soft side. There's the financial side, where helping people understand, hey, with this, if you're buying this to be your primary, you're getting a primary and a rental property at once combined. And there's some real advantages to that for a couple of reasons. Number one, your tenant is helping to pay your mortgage, and you're earning appreciation on 2 units at the same time instead of just one. And so number two, it's easier to manage that tenant on site than it is to have a tenant on the other side of town or in a different city, because they're right there. They see you. You can take care of issues. We've just found tenants tend to be more respectful when they're living in an ADU on the same property as the owner. They're more respectful of the property and taking care of things and reporting issues. And also they're helping people understand of like, hey, you're getting potentially a rental home and a primary all at once. Right now, you're going to appreciate the whole thing. There's new financial tools, even agency-oriented financial tools like Freddie Mac, that allow you to use the income from the ADU to offset your mortgage. You can qualify for a larger mortgage for the whole thing. Whereas even just a couple of years ago, that financial tool wasn't out there. So like Freddie Mac would look at financing a property and be like, oh, you got to have enough income to cover both units. And as the buyer, you're like, well, I'm going to rent that one out. And Freddie Mac's like, well, we don't care. What if you can't rent it out? We're not going to count that income. That's all changed in just the last couple of years. And so helping potential buyers understand that as well. And then, of course, the multi-generational buyer, as they walk through, they almost get it right away. They're like, awesome, we've got separate space, but we're close, and so it's just kind of getting them to understand how the house is laid out so they come and get a tour.
Okay. So basically getting people through the door.
Getting people through the door is super key. Yep.
Okay. So you touched on Fannie Mae. So they're the large government mortgage insurance provider and the buyer of packaged mortgages. Or rather, they set the standards for packaged mortgages. Talk to me about the financing that you took for this project, given the relatively unusual construction and what that process was like, and give us a little bit more insight into the mortgages that buyers are able to get and if they need any special dispensations like you were mentioning.
Yeah, so we capitalized this project in 3 different stages. And it's kind of unique, but it's something that we like to do, and we try and spread the word of like kind of this style of capitalizing because we think it fits really well with these infill projects. So we work with a lot of landowners that care about what gets built on their property. And so it's not just like a ranch on the outskirts of town, again, to that greenfield development. They want to sell to a national home builder and move on. Instead, a lot of these people care about what gets built on their property. And so when our partners on this project bought the land, they bought it with their own capital and purchased it and held the land for us for about 1.5 years while we worked through entitlement. So that was stage 1. Then we'd agreed on a purchase price ahead of time with them. And so then when it came time to actually purchase that property, that's what started stage 2. And they contributed that property into a partnership and were issued units. That was all a non-cash transaction. So they were issued LLC units in a partnership of the value, the fair market value that we negotiated of that property. And then we had agreed to put all the additional equity capital that was needed in that project in. And they basically wanted to be like, hey, we can put the land in the deal, but we don't want to, put another $700,000 into the project. So we said, no problem. They contributed the land. We then brought in equity from other investors, a pool of other investors, part of that fund that we had created, to bring in all the rest of the equity. And so the additional equity paid for the rest of the civil engineering and the horizontal construction we paid for out of cash. And so the road building, the utility hookups and the dirt moving and all that. So we did all that, covered all the design, city fees and everything. And then once the lots were ready to be recorded, we brought in a third-party private construction loan. So that was from a portfolio lender in Seattle. A ton of these companies for us, we used on that one, Builders Capital. They're a private lender. They specialize in construction, and they wrote a loan for the whole project. And for basically the hard costs of construction. And then there was like a contingency along each unit where as we built through, they're almost like reimbursing us back a little bit for the horizontal construction that we paid for out of pocket. So that gets drawn down slowly. Then as the homes sell and leave the portfolio, there's a partial construction loan payoff on that construction loan. And that's where that end user mortgage comes in. So of course that buyer could be a cash buyer, or they can, if they're getting a mortgage, they can go use any traditional mortgage. All of our homes as like stick built on foundation on their own lots. They're all qualified for traditional financing. So you can go get a regular mortgage, 30-year fixed or whatever. Now, for this project, because there's the second unit that can be used as a rental, that's where, for example, like Freddie Mac, the agency debt will look at that and allow a buyer to use 75% of the appraised rental value. So whatever the appraiser thinks that will rent for, if it's unrented, they haven't, because they haven't bought it yet, The appraiser's like, well, we think that'll rent for $2,000 a month. They can use $1,500 of that $2,000 as if it's income on their loan application to qualify for the loan from a debt to income ratio standpoint. And so that's how the financing works. Basically, for all the way for an acquisition, all the way to the financing for the end user. That's each of those stages.
So is that logic of being able to use future income from that rental property ADU to add to the income for the buyer, that's important to folks that are probably first-time home buyers, relatively strapped for the down payment. Would something like that help them get over the edge and clear the risk metrics that banks will typically use to decide to qualify? Or what types of people does that help?
Yeah, that helps people earning, let's say, around the median or the area median income qualify to buy this home where they get a home and a rental unit at the interest rate cost of a primary residence and at the down payment requirements of a primary residence. So think of it this way. Let's say somebody has an option. They can either buy a primary and they want to go buy a rental property on the other side of town. The primary, they can put a very low down payment on. They qualify for a very low interest rate because it's their primary. The rental property is going to require them to put 30% down and carry a higher interest rate. And so it's going to be much harder for them to achieve a primary and a rental property. When you combine those into a primary and a rental property or a primary and an ADU that are attached, you can qualify under some different programs where it's a primary with an ADU and there's going to be some ADU income that offsets it. So lower down payment requirements, lower interest rate requirements, that's going to always vary. There's not a strict rule as to what that is, but it's going to make it achievable for somebody that earns around the median income and has lower down payment resources to qualify to buy this as their primary and a rental property all at once, whereas that would be unachievable for them to do in two steps under traditional financing of like a major regular primary and not just to mention that if they're a small household and there's not a small 1-bedroom home for them to buy in town that's, under 1,000 square feet, they may be forced to go out into the suburbs and buy a 3-bedroom home, which is that much more expensive, going to suck up that much more of the resources, harder to qualify. And if you go, let's say you go to Fannie Mae and you're like, okay, I'm going to have a roommate, an unrelated adult roommate, help offset my mortgage. Fannie Mae traditionally, this may change, I'm not a lender, but traditionally would say, great, well, they have to, that unrelated adult roommate has to have been renting from you already in an existing residence for 2 years for us to get the rental revenue for that bedroom. And so the financing is just not set up to tackle that. So when somebody is like, man, I'd love a small home and a rental property, by combining them, like the financing just works. And it's now accessible in Bend for somebody that makes right around 100 AMI, 100% AMI, the area median income, or maybe up to, kind of 120 AMI, where to afford your typical median home in Bend, you have to be making 150 to 175% of AMI, because the price point for the median home price in Bend is between $700,000 and $800,000 for your regular single family home. And so we're selling these for, just 8% more than that or 10% more than that, but you're getting your rental property together and you're getting it all as if it was primary financing, primary down payment requirements. So that's that's more like the in-depth explanation that most buyers don't understand on the financing side. But if we can get them to fall in love with the space and they really want to make this work, then it's like, okay, you got to understand how this all works, and they got to be able to sit down and be patient enough to get the mechanics of it.
Yeah, that's more bang for your buck. That's essentially
Totally.
Yeah.
because you're dividing it into use levels. Yep.
More bang for your buck here, right?
If you need a marketing director, I'm happy to fly out to Bend. Okay, we talk about financing, and it sounds like the sales process, or the marketing to sales process, and the financing are actually quite intertwined with each other because of the unique structures that you described. Okay, so great project, and congratulations on getting that across the finish line. What's the current state? How much sold? How much left?
Yeah, so we finished the model home a few weeks ago. It was in the Torah Homes here. We won some awards, which was great. We got best architecture, best high performance home. That's something we did mention. Is all of our homes are we try to build our homes really efficiently as far as the utility use goes. The best way to do that is by making a small home. So that's kind of how we went down that road. So the model home is finished. The home that's on the market right now will be finished in the next month or two. And so, yeah, that's where we're at. And then about every 2 weeks, another home we'll have the CO and we'll put it on the market. We haven't sold anything yet. We've had a lot of people through, but no offers yet.
Okay.
The model, we've sold the model home. As far as the model home's under contract, but that transaction won't take place till we're done using the model home. So we put the model home under contract, but it's a very long escrow, so we can use that model home for several months. So that transaction hasn't closed yet.
Okay. And if folks that are listening from Oregon want to buy your houses, is it tell them the website to go to?
Yeah, just hiatushomes.com. You can find the link. It's on Zillow. You can just call me directly, and I'll take you down there and show it to you.
Boom, there you go. And they can join all of your investors that hang out all day on your construction sites.
Yeah, exactly. And watch construction and critique construction.
No, actually, you don't want those critiques of the bite. You do not want that. So we talked about Hiatus Ninth. I don't want to go with bigger picture. So small scale development is a solution to housing affordability and access to housing, particularly at the lower economic strata, and for households that don't fit the quote unquote norm of previous generations. So give us a sense of the scale of the housing affordability challenge that you see where you are, and any particular, say, anecdotes you've come across in terms of the kind of taking this bigger picture and what you see as the problem across the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we had an inventory. I'll just use Bend at first, and then I think it scales nationally a little bit. We had a huge inventory problem because house prices were, interest rates were 2 to 3%. House prices in Bend just skyrocketed all the way up to 2022. When the interest rates increased, a lot of people couldn't afford homes anymore, or couldn't afford the home that they could previously. That has created a ton of inventory in Bend, and nationally that's starting to happen as well. Everyone's waiting for a rate decrease. But what's happening, even, so like the story you hear, especially from real estate people, is as soon as the interest rates come down, everyone's coming off the sidelines, and they're gonna purchase all these homes. That could be true, but the other thing that's going on is builders are starting to slow down their building. So we're seeing a lot less building permits, whether that's multifamily or single family homes, slow down. So I think that inventory will be eaten up, and we're going to just go through the same cycle again, where once that inventory is gone, it takes so long to create housing. It takes us a year, as Ryan was saying, it took us a year and a half just to get through the entitlement phase to start building the homes. So one of the big pushes we're seeing through legislation in Oregon is to look at these middle income houses. And so that's an 80 to 120% AMI. It's been called workforce housing as well. And there has to be incentives for that, or it doesn't it doesn't sometimes make sense financially to do it. And those incentives can be what Bend has done, which is just change the code. Just allow us to put denser, more houses on a single lot. The other thing that can be done is the offsites that we have to do. Oftentimes, these really small developments, if it's only 4 houses, we're still having to do what you'd have to do for a subdivision, and we pay the same city fees. So there's a lot of work to still be done on this, but definitely it starts with the state and it starts with the city. They create legislation. They see there's a housing issue, and so they come up with all these ideas for how that can happen. A city adopts those, and the way the city adopts it, the people in the city agree to it. But then it comes down to the builders and the developers to try to use that to create housing. And sometimes that's really difficult because the way in which the code has been adopted, there's things in that need to be changed. So it's definitely going in the right direction, I think, by allowing these different building types, recognizing that the household sizes are smaller, and trying to facilitate that type of housing in your city in any way you can.
Okay, so it feels like the barriers to addressing this crisis, you've hit on a couple in this in your response just now, and then through the earlier parts of the conversation. I'm going to enumerate a few that I heard. You tell me if there's any that you want to add in. So one of the barriers to scaling small scale development as this housing type is awareness of what it is. 2, it sounds like helping people understand how this contextualizes within their cash flow, their in, their out, what they can afford. It feels like another barrier to this as a solution to housing is zoning code and building codes that are flexible and allow for higher density. It sounds like perhaps formerly financing was an issue on the construction side and or end user side, but that's no longer the case. Can you think of any tariffs, interest rates, but that affects all types of housing construction? What would you say are any other barriers to be able to scale this?
One really big one that I was starting to allude to is just the complexity of trying to get to the point where you can actually build a house on a piece of dirt. It is so complex actually in Bend that we've hired a person in city staff called a navigator. That position is just for me to call that person and say, hey, has planning talked to engineering and building to try to get our application through? The amount of time that it takes, we will raise money or find partners to get the land. That land is just sitting there, and that capital is not doing anything while we're doing this paperwork. So we just have to make it less complex to build. We have added so many layers to the process. Ezra Klein's Abundance book. Just read that book. I mean, it'll give you some really good examples of how we have just regulated the shit out of this industry, and we're going to regulate it so much that people just can't build anything anymore and make it financially viable.
We'll include a link to the book in the show notes.
Please do. It's a great book. I started out to all the city staff and all of our politicians, like, just read this book. This is what I think.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of hurdles, and he does address some of the policy hurdles there, treating it like a supply side issue. And this is to greatly simplify it. But one of the analogies he uses is he's like, if you have 10 people playing musical chairs and you have 10 chairs, when the music stops, everybody's going to get a chair, even somebody on crutches. But if you only have 9 chairs and you have 10 people, the person with crutches is never going to get a chair. What we've found, what I would say we found, and almost like my critique to take that analogy one more level, is, okay, we have 9 or 8 chairs, or maybe it's more like 6 chairs. Let's pretend it's 9 chairs. And one of the chairs is designated for the person with crutches. That would be like somebody struggling to get home. So that would be deed restricted to 60 AMI or less. Mm-hmm. That exists. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a pain. It takes a long time, but it does exist as far as like tax credit financing and, lift funds and all that. There's a whole financial ecosystem to support homes offered for 60 AMI workers and below, 60 AMI earners and below. And then of course there's, high earners don't have an issue buying homes. They can pay cash. They can qualify for traditional mortgages. The people that actually got left out were the middle, that 80 to 120 AMI income level, because it was almost like it, to use the musical chairs analogy from the book, is like, okay, yeah, there's only 9 chairs, but we designated one of those for the person in crutches. So now somebody that's just like a little slower, somebody with a bad ankle, they're not going to get a chair. And so some of the legislation that Jesse's referencing, we've seen in Oregon and some other states, is to say, hey, we need to change things in order to help now at 80 to 120 AMI so they can get a chair too. And so, on the one hand, there is certainly, politicians solve problems by creating laws. Fine, that's their job. Their job is to create laws.
I thought you were going to say they solve problems by creating more problems to distract.
Yeah, far more accurate. I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here. Clearly, there, part of it is just, like allow builders to create supply, like unleash the market. And everybody's really afraid of that because big bad developers are going to build terrible things that don't fit the neighborhood. That's the fear. But we've gone so far in the other direction on overregulation that like we can afford to pull back pretty far before developers are then going to be on the other side of the continuum, building big, ugly monstrosities on every corner that the neighborhood doesn't like and changes the fabric of the neighborhood. We simply have a big supply problem. That's like the first way to attack this. So, for us coming at Hiatus Ninth project, when we took a home that was a single home on a half acre where one person lived there, and by purchasing the property, subdividing the property, we created 9 twin homes. So that's 18 units that are each designed for 1 to 2 person households. You could conceivably have 36 people living in the space where previously one person lived. And those are the kinds of solutions that we need to see in our cities. Problem is, like, we make, so great. Some of those hurdles of change related to building code and zoning. Some of them have gotten unlocked related to like the financing for the end user and everything we've talked about. The area where we now have a bunch of hurdles is the infrastructure construction, the time cost to get from purchase through entitlement to building, and then all the fees and everything that are paid to the cities. We have jokingly looked at pro formas and been like, the city's making as much as we are as the developer. They're not taking any risk. They're simply regulating it. And they're forcing us to pay for engineering twice. We have to pay for a private engineer, and then the city re-engineers our plans. We pay for that with application fees, and they tell us the changes that get made. And that whole time we're doing time cost of money. We're paying our investors to just hold our dirt for weeks and weeks on end. And even on a small project, that's often $900 to $1,000 a day for 2 years or 2.5 years, because you might have $1 million to $2 million in equity from investors tied up on land, and they need a mid-teens investment return on the end of the day in order for them to invest in development and construction. So what that all creates is an environment where when we're looking at new land and new development projects, the only ones we're going to do are not the ones that are like marginally profitable but need to get done because they would bring housing supply. We're only going to be able to pick the development projects to start on that are so wildly profitable on paper that we know 2.5 years from now, after we've been feed to death and had delays and found hundreds of unexpected costs, they're still marginally profitable. And so that's the problem that we're seeing in most of our projects that we look at from a feasibility standpoint, die because of infrastructure costs, like infrastructure utility hookups, and just requirements on the city, like Jesse was calling offside. So them like, oh, you have to improve the alley over there. You have to improve the apron. You got to put an 8-foot sidewalk on, all the way across here, because the city is forcing its private developers to build the city's infrastructure, and they want to create an amazing utopian infrastructure. And so then we're like, well, we're only going to do the projects that can survive the alley improvement and the sidewalk and, the larger water main and the larger and this vac sewer in order to get the sewer out and all this. And so there are some real hurdles around infrastructure, timing, and permitting costs. And
So
I'd focus if I could.
So a lot of what you're describing was the inspiration of the themes around the Road to Housing Act, which passed the Senate just a few weeks ago. That was sponsored by Tim Scott of South Carolina, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. So Tim Scott, if you're listening to this, I want you on this podcast. I'm going to find my way to you. And the other person that's interesting to know, a lot of the good points that you brought up by Jesse was Ilhan Omar, who was the sponsor of a housing act in 2022. The name was the Housing for All Act. And it took a different approach, which was to say that there's a lot of public land that's available. So let's give public agencies at all different levels of government the ability to more smoothly contract out and build on all that land, and let's finance that in a way that's cost effective. So that didn't pass in 2022, but 2025, the Tim Scott's bill did. So both are super fascinating because they're federal level solutions to local level problems. So Ilhan Omar, if you're listening, I'd love to have you on the podcast. So she also had 3 new housing acts. I think one she proposed with Carolyn Maloney of New York recently. So I hope everyone enjoyed the Capitol Hill update of housing acts here. But the book that you mentioned is really good. The allegory or the metaphor of the seats and who gets to stay there or not. It's basically screws over the middle class. That's essentially the summary of what you described. And there's so many other good anecdotes. I think one in particular probably was the inspiration of the Road Housing Act that I mentioned, the 2025 one, which is here's a quote from that book: "Liberals might detest the language of Trump, but Blue America practices its own version of scarcity politics, and that's zoning regulation, and that's increased costs far more than any influx of immigrants has." So I think that critique of blue state policy is very important when it comes to housing production. So tons of really good points there that you brought up. So I want to talk about. Let's now combine this with your experience in Bend. So many cities struggle with zoning for cottage and ADU and other small-scale construction. Bend is not one of them, based on our conversation today. But what would you say are some of the tips or the tools that you would recommend developers in other cities that may be coming up against zoning or building code hurdles to do things like this, what they can do to get the ball rolling and start change at that local level?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up here in Bend. I knew we had a city council, and I knew we had a city staff. I had no clue how our city worked at all. And I had to figure that out because there was just a project I wanted to do, and just finding out where the barriers were, and then would talk to those people. It's amazing. If you have an idea that resonates with people, and especially if it's this type of housing, if you can have a specific project, it doesn't have to be large. It can be, a few homes on a lot, and you can get some nice renderings so people can see. I think it's really important to have visuals so people can understand what you're talking about. And then, go down to the city, start going to the city council meetings and meet your city councilors. They're all just people who live in your community, and you can talk to them and you can have coffee with them and find some advocates that believe in this type of stuff and what they're trying to do. I think most people that live in a city want to make sure the middle class is still around. Bend is a place that really cares about that, because we care about our community and we want the lifestyle we have. We recognize that the middle class is a big part of that and why it's a cool place to live. And I think you can look at other cities that didn't care about that. And now you just have tons of rich people with no workers able to work there. But it starts with just an idea, a piece, a lot, and then, try to find some advocates, around through the city council. And that's how all this stuff happened for us. It started was there was no code, land use code or building code that allowed this. If you look at all the code we have, it's now difficult for us to figure out what to do on a lot because there's so many options. So yeah, I would just say, don't think that your local voice doesn't work. It's it's how America actually, it gives me some faith in America that on this local level, you can get change done. Even if the change, I tell people this when they are like, we don't want your development there. There's too many houses. What are you doing? And I say, look, this is in our code. Like we're building to, what we can do in the city. If you don't like that, you should go down and talk to the city. At some point, maybe the entire city says, hey, we have too many of these cottages and ADUs and these little houses. We don't like them. And that might change, but it starts with having a really good example and then, talking to the people in your community. And that's not just the city council. That's, Chamber of Commerce. There's always some, there's 1,000 committees trying to figure this out in your city. I guarantee it.
Amazing. That is the kick in the butt that a lot of people need to be active in politics. This is the off-year election in 2025. So that's New Jersey and Virginia, large sweeping elections in both states. High population, maybe not so high growth, some growth in New Jersey, but definitely high growth in Virginia. And then obviously the midterms are in 2026, and that race will start very quickly. So
get involved. It's fun. It's actually really fun to get involved and figure out how all this works. I really enjoy that part of what we do.
So there's one anecdote for me is when I got started with Monmouth Properties after leaving Extel Development, that kind of coincided with my interest in politics. So I started by knocking on doors for the person who became the mayor of Hoboken, Ravi Bala, the person that became one of the downtown city councilmen in Jersey City, James Solomon. He's now running for mayor of Jersey City. And I can tell you, as a developer and someone in the real estate industry, it's so fascinating to do door knocking because you essentially are prospecting for projects.
Yeah,
by talking to people. But I mean, I'm being a little tongue in cheek to be funny, but I think more importantly, you just get an understanding of who actually lives in these buildings and what their concerns are, and that becomes a really good kind of canvas to have in the back of your mind as you're thinking about where you want to invest your money and where you want to invest your time as a developer.
Yeah. Door knocking. We're going to have to start doing that.
Yeah. We've ended up, maybe not through intentional door knocking, but we've ended up building relationships with neighbors around our projects. And that's a bit of a consequence of just being on site. And they're not shy. They're not, if they don't like something, they're not trying to spare our feelings. They'll tell us that, but in general, they're encouraging on our projects. We try and build tasteful density, meet a need in the community that's been an underserved home buyer and everything. And it does certainly, it all comes down to the local level. That's where the governance actually takes place. But the legislation at the state and federal level really helps because it kind of at least kicks the local governments to okay, we got to adopt this. We have to do something. And then at the local level, they start to figure it out. And I think we've seen that certainly in Oregon, there's been a lot of housing legislation. And so, I think that's a positive way to go about it. And then we can get a voice in at the local level to try and be like, hey, okay, that state law that came down, here's the best way to use it, or here's how it actually works for developer on the ground. And so, it's a very highly regulated industry. You can't just go build homes. You need approval from everybody. And so, it's important to get that buy-in.
Excellent. That is a great inspiration to end our wonderful and very great interview. So thank you so much for your time to be here with us, Jesse and Ryan. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was great talking with you.
I'm Atif Kader, and thanks for joining me on American Building. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe on your favorite listening app and leave a rating and review. America's housing crisis is one of our greatest challenges, but what are the real solutions? Hear from the developers and other industry experts driving meaningful change. Get our exclusive guide, Housing in America, 8 Ways We Can Solve Our Way Out of a Crisis, at AmericanBuildingPodcast.com.